The story of us as probably the most distal animal on the planet is we have an organ that I specialize in, the brain, that's an obligate normoxic aerobe, meaning that it works best when we use a TCA cycle. Turns out, when you look back at life, the first two domains, they were obligate anaerobes. They were functioning in a completely different environment. So between those two things, this story about oxygen becomes really important. And when you point out to people that the TCA cycle basically is a cycle that's based around oxygen levels that are really high, you start to ask yourself the question, well, what happens when oxygen, for some reason, is not very high around us? And can it be turned off some way? And this is where the rubber meets the road. It turns out, when you look at oxygen carrying capacity, which every doctor knows is tied to hemoglobin, hemoglobin can only carry oxygen in the +2 state. When it gets to be in the +3 state, which is methemoglobin, it becomes incapable of carrying oxygen. And most doctors know that that's an issue. Most doctors, however, have no idea how to truly treat or diagnose methemoglobinemia. And most of them default to learning, look at the pulse ox. And it turns out if you look at a regular pulse oxes can't tell you if someone has methemoglobin or not. And the reason why I'm bringing this up to you now, why it's really important, if your patients are in front of things that change the oxidation state of iron, they can be fully conscious in your operatory, in your clinic, and they're walking around with between 5, 10, 15% of methemoglobin in them. What does that mean? It means their brains and their organs can't use the TCA cycle. And this is the biggest conundrum. And what happens, even though there's 21% oxygen around all of us, your mitochondria become incapable of using oxygen when the oxidation state is changed. And it turns out light is capable of changing the oxidation state of iron in every heme protein in your body. And when you learn that, that's when the game begins to change, because then you start to go, wait a minute. You're telling me that this can happen without us eating food, carbohydrates, fats, lipids. The answer is that is absolutely true. It's axiomatically true. But guess what? Nobody in medical school learns that that's true because they never get one biophysics class anywhere in medical school. Bacteria can be from really anything, but the number one cause in the world today is screens. Screens actually do that because screens change the oxidation state from +2 to +3. And when you go to +3, you can't carry oxygen. It's that simple. The truth about what Becker really found in his work, and I think they were afraid that you would get onto the scheme. This is, remember, what drugs did they have in the pipeline at that time? They had the Ozempic drugs ready to go, even all the way back then. They knew that they were going to be able to print money because they were going to create a lot of fat people from the use of technology. They already knew it. The data was already there. The problem is they didn't want anybody to know it. That's why they shelved the leptin trials in the early 1990s. They found out that this was a big problem, and they knew about it. And they knew that the key cause was tied to this story about the oxidation state. And when Nora Volkow wrote her paper at NYU in 2011 and showed that blood glucose went up and insulin went up just from the use of cell phone with no food, that should have caused people like, Thomas Siegfried and the other guy, I'm blanking on his name. He's a pediatric endocrinologist from UCSF. You had a very famous talk about fructose being the cause of obesity in kids. I'll think of his name at some point. But anyway, he was a pretty famous guy probably 15 years ago. Not so famous anymore. Why? Because he wanted everybody to blame food for what light and oxygen were really causing. Why? Because Big Pharma did a spectacular job hiding this basic information that I'm telling you by making sure that the leptin trials never went to full course. And if they would have went to full course, guess what we would have found out? That all of metabolism is controlled by oxygen tensions and by the light in our environment. And that's ultimately why neuropsin, melanopsin, encephalopsin. All these opsin proteins are everywhere where light needs to be signaled. And if you would have understood that, that means every disease, like the disease you asked me about, because I want to be accurate about this, metabolic syndrome is a disease of electrical resistance in the body, and you are losing that 30 million volt charge in all these different organs, and that's the reason why the changes happen. And remember, you know that the BP changes there. Well, what do you know about nitric oxide, my friend? Decreases your blood pressure, doesn't it?
Yep.
So aren't you starting to see the pieces and parts? What did I tell you about the liver? What was the main purpose of the liver in a baby? Remember, the baby wasn't eating. It was making fetal red blood cells. Well, what would you expect to happen in metabolic syndrome when you're hypoxic? The liver gets huge again, doesn't it? And that's exactly what happens in these cells. And why does that happen? The fat builds up in the liver. You get fatty liver disease because you can't use what, my friend? The TCA cycle to burn the fats. It's a consequence of this oxygen problem. And you have all these doctors, even some of the doctors that follow me, like Max Gulhane, convinced that seed oils are the cause of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And what have I been telling them for 2, 3, 4, 10 years? None of them will listen. It's all biophysical. And when you don't know the basics, that's how big pharma gets you. All it takes is for you to miss the key piece of data, and then you'll continue doing the stupid shit that they want you to do, selling all kinds of drugs to people and doing all kinds of things that make no sense. And as soon as you begin to see this laid out in front of you, you go, I always thought Jack was crazy. I always thought, he was outspoken. And I've said it on multiple podcasts. I'm still waiting for you guys to come prove me wrong. That's all I'm asking for.
Is food the final psyop, bro? Food is the final psyop. You can munch all the salmon Nutella you want, but if you don't get natural light in your eyes and your skin, that salmon Nutella ain't doing much good for you, my boy. If you ain't really that science savvy yet, although we need to be, every subscriber and viewer need to be of base science, need to be very science savvy. This is some extremely important science because it basically tells you biophysics over biochemistry. Biochemistry, you ain't enough. You ain't enough for us. We need biophysics because that's more fundamental. That sits on top of your ass, biochemistry. Food, yeah, food still important, but we already got that shit figured out with that raw chicken, salmon Nutellas and stuff. Light, biophysics, that's the next level. If you don't see morning sunrise and sunlight, your TCA cycle doesn't work. Guess what that means? You can eat all the raw meat, you can eat all the meat, all the fatty goodness you want, but you cannot fat burn. That's how important that is. That's the software that runs the hardware. Biophysics. Number 1. Praise the sun. And still remember to eat your salmon Nutella. It's still good. It's still the best. It's still the best food available. But remember, if you don't get that praise sun part right, you're fucking it up.